Good morning, church. I am still here. That may surprise some of you, since last week I announced I'm going on sabbatical, but this will be for the month of November, and we had one last Sunday in October left. But you're not going to be hearing much from me today, relatively speaking. Today is the fifth Sunday of the month, which happens about once a quarter. And on these days, we do things a little differently. Now, back before the pandemic, a fifth Sunday would be a koinonia Sunday, which is the Greek word for fellowship. And on these days, instead of rows, we would move the chairs around tables, where we would have a special communion service that was a little more communal than we typically do. And that layout worked great, because on those days we had a potluck. But on those days, instead of a sermon, I would take the opportunity to interview people in our church about their life experiences. And I've interviewed families, ministry leaders, elders, missionaries, and others about how they have seen God at work in their lives. Because you hear so often from me, I want to hear from you. I want you to hear from you. And this year, especially those who have been on the front lines of this pandemic. In August, right before school started, we heard from teachers and educators. Because these last couple of school years have been challenging. And they opened up about their experiences and the challenges that they faced, the challenges that they overcame, and how they overcame them. How they saw God's presence in the midst of it all. And how we as a congregation and as a community can support them. And we're going to be doing the same today, but this time with our healthcare workers. We have several who are part of our church, and if you've talked to them in the last year and a half, you will know it has not been easy for them. The novel coronavirus, which arrived in Michigan sometime in mid-March 2020, and it wasn't long after that our lives were changed in ways that I don't need to tell you, because we all know very well by now. But nobody saw the sudden impact like our hospitals. So much of what we did back then was for their benefit, trying to flatten the curve and slowing the spread of the virus to prevent our hospital systems from being overwhelmed, especially since supplies like masks and gloves and medical equipment like ventilators were in short supply. And that was a difficult couple of months last spring. But they persevered. And the summer brought us some relief. But that wasn't the end, though. And we saw another surge in cases and hospitalizations this time last year, which peaked in December but didn't let up until late January. And that downtime was even shorter, though, because then in April of this year, we saw the worst surge of the pandemic so far. And compared to last spring, the hospitals were better equipped, they were more ready, but it was still overwhelming, with some hospital ICUs in the area nearing 90% capacity. And then the summer came, and it was much better again, but here we are again. And the numbers are going back up. Fortunately, so far, nowhere near what they have been before, but it's still concerning again. And I think I can say most of us are tired of the pandemic. And we should be. It has been exhausting. But every time I think about giving up and giving in, I think about our healthcare workers. Because they are still there at the front lines, even after all this time. Both my sisters are nurses. So I've heard the stories from them, and not all of those stories can be shared from this stage. But I think it's very important to hear some of what our healthcare workers have been going through, because they deserve to be heard and listened to, which will help us as a community continuing to support and encourage them. And so I've invited three of our nurses, Cindy Lapp, Yvonne Avery, and Terry Allen, to join me on stage today. And we have more healthcare workers than that, but we also have a limited amount of time, and I bet the three of them can fill it. I'd like to ask all of our healthcare workers to stand so we can publicly recognize and show our appreciation for you. If you could do that. Thank you so much. We've got a little video that we want to show in your honor, and during this video, we can work on our transition and get some chairs up. But AV team, could you play this? Clicker. Thank you. I'm going to say that a lot today, but thank you. And thank you for joining me on stage, because I know that's not always the easiest thing to do. But first, I'm just going to start off by asking you, who are you? Simple question. Introduce yourself. Tell me about where you work, what you've been doing. Is that on? I don't know. Is this on? Is this on? Sure. There we go.
I'm Cindy Lapp, and my role at the hospital is as a nursing supervisor. So I'm the person that's responsible for making sure we have appropriate staffing on every unit and for dealing with any patient concerns or patient complaints, if you will. And just kind of making sure the whole thing runs smoothly. I work at night, so there's no other administrative staff that are there, so I'm kind of it when I'm there.
Yvonne Avery. I am the Director of Med-Surg and Critical Care, which is 9 units at St. Mary Mercy down the street here. And I also run the vaccine clinic, as many of you know from here.
He's got his own microphone.
You may recognize me as Terry Allen, and I'm in charge of the ICU at night, in charge of the RN staff. I've been in critical care nursing for 13 years, and about 6 of it in this local hospital. And I also got my master's as an NP in acute care, so I'm still waiting on a career if anybody has any openings.
All right, so this is first question. I know it's a big one, but feel free to answer it however way you want to. But tell us your experiences as a healthcare worker during this pandemic, the last 19 months now, whatever how long it's been. What challenges have you faced? What's it been like? 591 days. So, Cindy, you want to start us off?
So for me, when I was thinking about these questions, there's kind of 2 answers to all of them. And the first answer is really what happened during that first onslaught of patients, because that's been very different since then. That first onslaught of patients, we were really pretty close to being overwhelmed in the hospitals because all we were doing was COVID, and we were full of COVID. People used to ask me what it was like, and so for people of a certain age and older, this will resonate with you. I said it was like being in a MASH unit, for those of you that remember the MASH TV show. In that show, when they would have wounded coming in, they would just keep coming. The helicopters would keep coming. And that's literally what it was like in March and April of May of 2020. It just didn't really stop. And no matter what we did, no matter when you were there were just more patients that were coming all of the time. And much of it, and I'm sure these guys will talk about this too, in those first 3 months, some of the challenges we were facing was this was a novel virus. And so we really didn't know very effectively how to treat it. And we were trying things that we had tried with pneumonias in the past, and there was just a lot of confusion from a treatment regime, if you will. And of course, as you know, a lot of people were dying, and that was very, very challenging and very, very hard on the staff. I think for me, another thing that was really challenging in the beginning was dealing with the almost irrational response that was happening around us on both extremes. We had the extreme of people that believed that this was a hoax and that everybody was lying to them. And then we had people on the other extreme that felt like the world was ending. And honestly, there were times in the hospital where it did feel, like things were out of control and ending. But that was very, very challenging, to deal with that. One challenge that we did not deal with in those 3 months was traffic. It was beautiful driving to and from work because there was no one else on the road. Anyway, so for me, in the beginning, those were the challenges, was trying to figure out how to do what we needed to do for these patients and being so frustrated that we couldn't provide the care that they needed to survive. Do you guys want to talk about that part, or?
I'll take that, yeah.
And then
Since she's taking half of our,
Okay.
I'll let her talk for a minute, then I'll talk again. I was really trying to not make this a negative thing, because I got to tell you, the negativity is just rampant out there. Our first patient from Michigan was March 11th. For those of you who don't remember, it was University of Michigan. It was a Livonia citizen, if you don't remember that. And then by March 15th is when our first patient hit the doors of St. Mary Mercy Hospital in Livonia. And I have to tell you, we were very quickly, Livonia, and there was a couple of contributing reasons why Livonia was hit so very very hard, and very fast. By the 15th, our patient was admitted to a unit called 3 South, which is my former unit. Carol Ann Wright worked on that unit. Rolled in the doors. We didn't know what it was. Remember, in the beginning, we didn't have testing, and the testing we had took 5 to 7 days to get from California. So we didn't have, all we could go by was chest x-rays and symptoms. And our first patient rolled into 3 South, quickly deteriorated. We moved to our step-down unit, and within 15 minutes was in Terry's ICU. And that was the beginning. And we already knew upwards of 20 to 30 employees were exposed to COVID. First day, March 15th. And from then on, within 2 weeks, the 304-bed hospital that is down the street here was 100% COVID. One of the things you don't realize is that within 5-mile radius of St. Mary Mercy Livonia, there are 33 senior nursing facilities, whether they're subacute rehabs or skilled nursing facilities or assisted livings. And when one patient would get it, they literally would send all of them. That was within close proximity. And a lot of it was out of fear. And a lot of it was because people were watching what? The news. So we filled up very quickly. At one point in time, 77 patients were in that hospital that didn't need to be there, but their facilities wouldn't take them back. And we had 77 beds that we were desperate need of, and we had no place to put them other than to keep them in the hospital. And I have to tell you, anybody who thinks staying in a hospital is a good idea, you need to get out of a hospital as soon as you possibly can. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but you need to get out of hospitals, and this is even before COVID time. So one of the things that I think was our greatest asset from this little hospital, which I know a lot of people in this room remember the reputation of St. Mary Mercy. I got to tell you, I would not work in a hospital I didn't have faith in. It did have a bad reputation. It has changed significantly. Terry and I wouldn't work someplace we didn't believe in. Is it perfect? No. But I will tell you, we had our chief medical officer, Matt Griffin, who's a Livonia citizen here, is military. Our CNO, Nick Nicolopoulos, was military. And then 2 of our other directors of areas were military. And I have to tell you, it made a huge difference on how we mobilized that hospital and how we were able. We had people, the president sent a whole task force to our hospital to sit and talk with us to figure out how did this little community hospital do what it did. So there was a lot of things that went into that. The challenges, one of the things some of you don't even realize in the very beginning, which has changed significantly, they did not want pregnant nurses to take care of COVID patients. That was the very beginning news. The news changed literally. We did huddles in the morning, and we did huddles at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., and literally things changed that fast. So what we were telling our staff at 9, by 4 we were changing it, and that was hard. Like, that is a constant environment of change. And so we redeployed all of our pregnant nurses to one unit. And it was the only unit we were keeping clean, which was our oncology unit. And we deployed all of them to one area. So we took staff that was used to working in all different areas. We completely closed down all elective surgeries, as most hospitals did. And I have to tell you, we failed our communities by doing that. By shutting down our ability to do procedures. All of us knew after we got through that first huge admission process, the onslaught, the slaughter, I mean, if you really want to call it something, we realized the next time that the next surge came, we could not close. We needed to know how to figure out how to continue to do our business and serve our chemotherapy stopped. Cath labs, the only thing that we did is when somebody came in the emergency room and only did emergent surgeries, we stopped all electives. All hospitals did in this area. And we knew we couldn't do that again. We knew we needed to change things. So those were some things that were all behind the scenes. I don't know that people realize that what we were facing is the fact that a lot of people were too afraid to come to where they should have been very safe feeling to come. Mm-hmm. I could go on and on, but I'm going to let Terry take some so that we don't take everything from him. Go ahead, Terry.
So we had patient 1 come in, and by the end of the week we were trying to keep, we have some negative pressure rooms. We try to keep patients with COVID in the negative pressure rooms. We only have 2 of them. We have 16 ICU rooms, and just to give you an idea of what our typical caseload is like, we have trauma patients, we have surgical patients, cardiac patients, neurosurgery, and we kind of have an even distribution of everybody. So if we have, let's say, 4 or 5 trauma patients, that's kind of out of the ordinary, or 4 or 5 cardiac patients, that's kind of out of the ordinary. We had 16 beds in the ICU, and we had 16 COVID patients, which is unheard of. I left for a few days. I had a few days off. I come back on the weekend. We had 30 COVID patients in the ICU. We only have 16 ICU beds. So how do you do that? So we had taken our ICU nurses and tried to staff another unit. We opened a unit on the first floor that was being used for classrooms. We stuck beds in them, through some monitors and some ventilators that we borrowed from ambulance companies. We just didn't have the supplies. So here we are, a unit that's staffed with enough nurses, ICU nurses, to take care of usually 12 to 14 patients, and we had 31 on vents one night, and we had 40 people that were critically ill. One of the hard things that you do as a nurse is you start to get used to life and death, and it's not a terrible thing, because I took care of a priest one time. He said, you Americans say the word, if I die. There's no if I die. It's when I die. And it becomes part of your cycle as an ICU nurse especially. When a patient dies and you feel relief because that's opened up a bed, that's when you know that your job is being stressful. The mortality rate of CPR for COVID patients is 100. What that means is if a COVID patient gets to their oxygenation where they're no longer supporting their brain or heart, and you do CPR on them, their chance of survival is 0. There's never been a COVID patient who had a respiratory arrest that we did CPR on and lived. So we stopped doing CPR. So we would watch a patient's oxygen dwindle down, and we'd stand there in the window and watch it. And then they would die, and then we would take them to the morgue, and we had an open bed for the next patient to come in. And it's kind of difficult in a way to feel relief when a patient dies. One of the hard things about being an ICU nurse is the mask on, gloves on, gown on, space helmet on. Go do something, get in the room. Try not to itch your nose, because we didn't know if itching your nose was going to get you sick. Come out of the room, take it off in the exact opposite order. Take the space helmet off, take your gown off, take your gloves off, put the gloves in the garbage, take your mask, wash it with bleach, give it to somebody else who's going to put your mask on, because we didn't have enough and it smells like bleach, and go and treat the patient in the next room. So just doing your ordinary things that you don't have time for, because as a nurse you're constantly documenting and constantly doing things, everything became twice as hard. So we were just doing an enormous amount of work, and with just supply roadblocks all along the way. And plus you have all the stress of being on units or treating patients in a closet because we didn't have the rooms. It was kind of a nightmare for a while there.
We really experienced some of that same growth exponentially over a few days. There was one Sunday in March. I had worked 60 hours the week before, and I was off Saturday and Sunday, and I was up getting ready to come to church, and I got a phone call, and I needed to go in. So that particular day, we had outgrown our ICU, which is 24 beds. So we have 37 ICU level beds, and we had one unit that was clean and one unit that was COVID. And so we had filled those beds, and we had 4 patients waiting that were already intubated, meaning that they have a tube and they need to be hooked up to a ventilator. And so those 4 patients were outside of the ICU, meaning that a respiratory therapist has to stay with them, bagging them until we can get them to a place where they can be a ventilator. And by Thursday of that week, we had increased, just like Terry was describing, to 76 ICU level beds in various places throughout the hospital. So yeah, that was really a challenge. I will say this, nurses, what Terry's talking about watching people die and almost being grateful that you have another bed for the patient that's waiting. It's a weird thing, but it's very true. And I will say this, nurses were committed to not letting somebody die alone. Mm-hmm. They were always with them because families couldn't be with them. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of FaceTiming, families watching their loved one die. Mm-hmm. Did you guys do that? Yep. So that it was really challenging. There's no question.
Yeah.
So piggyback on that, Terry's talking about, the bed issue. We had, down the street, we have a 31-bed psychiatric unit and an 11-bed chemical dependency. And those are both outpatient type. Those are healthy people who have an addiction. And we had closed those units. And we had decided that we needed to open up a comfort care unit. And I see Bob Karras out here. The Livonia Rotary Club was amazing. They brought flowers, they bought food. The Livonia community brought, there wasn't a meal that we needed to even worry about. I don't know that anybody's ever going to eat pizza again, to be honest with you. But they brought food just by the semis, or subs, yeah. But I opened up on April 7th, I opened up an 11-bed comfort care unit. And as Cindy said, families were too afraid to come in. We purchased 150 iPads, which I know whoever went to Best Buy in all the areas, we literally purchased 150 iPads so that we could do FaceTime. And we would stand over the bed while somebody said goodbye to their loved ones. And like to know that you are going to that extent, because and I have to tell you, we were in a better situation in PPE, which is personal protection equipment, than a lot of hospitals were. We all know where all that stuff comes from, right? Not the United States. NXY, which is a company right on the corner, it's one of our board members from our hospital, they converted their entire plant to make PPE for this area. And that family, and the Sadu family is an amazing family. They converted the entire plant to make the stuff we needed. Ford Motor Company, face shields, brought us by the just millions of stuff. The community, the surrounding areas did so much, and I don't know that people really knew that was happening right in our own backyards. The 11-bed comfort care unit was, as Terry said, we didn't have enough ventilators. And we, with the emergency order from the governor of Michigan, gave hospitals the ability to choose who we put on a ventilator and who we didn't. And when we had very ill with lots of comorbidities, with a lot of other issues like kidney disease, diabetes, heart disease, and were towards end of life, we, like you said, the MASH unit, we made the decision that they were going to be comfort measures only, whether the family wanted it or not. And we ended up not putting them on ventilators. So we opened up this unit, and in less than 5 weeks, 108 people that we did compassionate care for end of life, which is basically, it's called morphine every 15 minutes until there's no gasping, because that's what's happening at the end of life with COVID. And so we opened that with just staff that volunteered from other departments. We redeployed 36 nurses from our OR area and outpatient area that had critical care background. They were trained by a nurse like this. I don't even know how many you've actually trained, or you kind of reintroduced them to the ICU setting, but they all had ICU background. And in that time frame, I was thinking the Rotary Club, they brought in flowers for every one of our comfort care rooms, so that we had flowers in there for these patients. And again, we talk about a small hospital. Our hospital morgue holds about 6 bodies. We had to bring 3 refrigeration trucks because the other problem was funeral homes would not take anybody, because there was not enough knowledge to know whether or not you could get COVID that way. So we had 3 refrigeration trucks, and our CMO jokes, he said, next time we have to go through something like this, we're gonna put the trucks out on 5 Mile Road so people see the impact. We had it tucked away behind the back of the hospital so that when we rolled everybody out up into a refrigeration truck, it wasn't to the consumer's eye or the community's eyes. But three trucks full for weeks because there was the fear from our funeral homes that wouldn't take. So all of these were all decisions that we had to come together. The hours that we all worked beyond. We had nurses that had small children that didn't want to go home, and we put them up in hotels in the local area so that they could go to and from work and not feel like they were going to infect, because we didn't know. We didn't know. So they wouldn't infect their children or their loved ones. So there was so much that was going on. We knew that quickly with everything that was going on, we needed to do a couple of things to give hope. And every time we had a patient that was discharged from the hospital that had COVID, we played a song from Kool and the Gang called Celebrate. So every time the staff heard the song, they knew somebody was leaving the hospital, and we had what? We'd conquered, COVID. Clap-outs. I don't know if any of you saw on Facebook clap-outs, but we had patients that had been in our ICU 47 days, 67 days, and they came to our inpatient rehab unit, and we hosted clap-outs for them after being in the hospital for 4 months, 3 months. And the halls would be lined with people, and you would just clap them out of the hospital, and the families would be outside. And that's a whole nother thing. Families that didn't come to visit because they were too afraid or couldn't, because we said what? For COVIDs, no visitors. So those were all a lot of the challenges we faced, but to see what everybody did to step up to make sure we would call families every day. Our call time was 10 o'clock in the morning. We would FaceTime people. We used our cell phones. We did everything that we possibly, and I'm not a technology fan at all, but I got to tell you, it really helped us during the COVID time. We didn't have tools like remdesivir or monoclonals. That didn't come till later. We didn't have any of that. We only had, in the beginning, it was put everybody on a ventilator as fast as you can. And then we found out that is not what you need to do. You need to wait and push back as much as you can. I know proning, and I don't know if anybody in here knows what proning is, but putting somebody on their belly. It's amazing how something is simple and there's no technology to it, but getting people to go on their stomachs helped a lot. But you had to do it early in the process. These were all things that we didn't know until later. So you look at, I'm just really thankful that as healthcare providers across the world, we're able to pull together and use science to help us figure it out in the early days, because there was no magic medicine. There was no magic pill. There was no magic IV. Go ahead.
So, now you guys have been mostly talking about last spring, and maybe this next question will tie in with right now. What challenges, you talked about challenges, what have you overcome? And what has helped you to do so? If you want to talk a little bit more about your situation right now, this could be a good time to talk about that.
So what's different now, and some of you have heard me talk about this, what's different now is that we're not overwhelmed with COVID in the hospitals, even during these surges. No matter what you hear from the media, we're not overwhelmed. We're full and we're very busy, but a small percentage of those are COVID patients. We're tired. We're tired of this pandemic, there's no question. I think as healthcare workers, we're all waiting eagerly for the day when we can call this an endemic virus, meaning that it's just something that happens. You know, kind of like H1N1 that we had a number of years ago. You guys will remember we had a member that had that. We have that every year, but now it's not fearful. It's not crazy and scary like it used to be, because now we know how to treat that. So like Yvonne and I'm sure Terry will talk about, we have treatments now for these patients. We know how to handle them. And I want to just make a comment about science. That word gets thrown around in this pandemic in a way that it's become almost like a stick that we beat people with. And science, you guys, science is about learning. Science is about changing what you do for people based upon what you've learned in the past month, or in the past 2 months, or in the past 6 months. And so for people that get really upset because we're doing something different today than we did a year and a half ago, that would be awful if we weren't, because that's what science is. Science looks at what's going on, does studies, and then provides guidance for how we need to do something moving forward. And so the fact that things have changed is actually expected. We know a lot more about what we're doing, when we treat these patients. So these last surges, we're not overwhelmed at the hospital. I don't think any of us would say that we are. We're doing business as usual. We're doing open heart surgeries. We're doing cardiac catheterizations. We're doing regular surgeries. We're doing everything under the sun. And so we're busy. I know it frustrates me when I hear a media personality, talk about that our hospitals are at 95% occupancy and they're overwhelmed with COVID again. I want to scream, no, we're not. Yes, we're busy and we're full, and yes, our ERs are backed up, but it's not because of COVID. We have some of those patients, but we're not overwhelmed with that. So really be aware of that, and I would just recommend, when you are getting upset from what you're hearing in the media, talk to those of us that are actually on the front lines, and we can help you understand. In these last couple of surges, the vast majority of people recover at home. They don't even need to come to the hospital. And those that are in the hospital, we treat them, but they're not there for the extended, I'm not seeing very many people at this point that are in the hospital for 60 days or, that kind of a thing. Or they're certainly not in the ICU on a ventilator for that long like they were, last spring. So it has been very different these last surges. The surges are happening, but it's not, how to say it right, it's just not it's nothing like it was in March, April, and May of last year. Nothing.
So you have to understand, from my point of view, in critical care, I treat the sickest of the sickest patients. In the ICU over the past couple of weeks, about half of our patients have been COVID patients, and the majority of those patients either have died or will. Between the last day I worked last week and when I came in this week, there were 3 patients that had died. And they were patients who, if I'm talking about pneumonia, a patient comes in on Sunday and they leave on Wednesday. And then we get another pneumonia patient and they come in on Wednesday and they leave on Saturday. And so we have 2 pneumonia patients in a week. Well, if we have a COVID patient come in on Sunday, they're going to be there for 3 weeks. And then we have another one coming on Wednesday, and they're going to be there for 3 weeks. So we end up having 7, 8 COVID patients, and they just stay there for a long time. So half our population are COVID patients, and they stay there for a long, long time, and their outcomes are typically very poor. So in my department, it's really frustrating to have patients who are coming in with COVID, and we treat them, and we go in the rooms, and we're all gowned up, and we're doing this, we're providing treatment, and we're proning, and we get them on the vent, and we're doing everything that they can, and it's frustrating because we know probably all of our efforts are going to end up the same way. It causes a lot of burnout. So one of the challenges that, the big challenges for me and my colleagues are just this feeling of burnout, that we're just working so hard for something that's just not going to have a good outcome. One of my low points, I can think of 3 examples of kind of low points. I had this patient, he had an appointment to go get his vaccine, and his church talked him out of it. So he said, I didn't get it because they told me not to go get it. And he died about 3 weeks into his stay in our ICU. We had a patient who was she stayed at home, she didn't talk to people, she wore a mask, she ordered her groceries, had them delivered, and she really believed that she could keep herself safe and wash her hands, do everything, and her husband didn't. He thought it was a hoax. He brought the COVID home to her, she got sick, and we just fought to keep her off the vent. She got on the vent, we fought to keep her lungs clean, we did everything we could for her. In about a month and a half of all of our hard work, she died. Her husband walked past the desk and looked at us and he said, "She died because you guys didn't care about her." That's a low point for me because you can't spend a month and a half with somebody and not have a relationship with them. Last Christmas, I came into work at 7 o'clock. By midnight, I had taken 2 patients to the morgue on Christmas. And it just kind of hit a point to me where I thought, there's no more comments I can make on Facebook. There's no teaching. People have made up their minds. And I kind of gave up on this idea that I'm going to make any difference other than I'm going to go to work and be the best nurse I can be. So what's helped me to overcome these things? And I think one of my favorite words, if I were going to put it on a resume, would be balance. Because as a nurse, you have to care. If you don't care, you're going to be a terrible nurse. You have to care about people. You have to really want people to do well. Your worst patient that you don't like, you want them to do well so they leave. Your patients that you really like, you want them to do well so they go home. You're striving to do your best. I've had prisoners. I've had the children of CEOs. And I treat them, they say, "I have pain." I say, "I'll go get you some pain medicine." I'm going to treat everybody well because that's who I am. And I care. And if you care a lot, that makes you a good nurse. If you care a lot, you're going to burn out because you're seeing people that you care about do poorly. So you have to care about people and you have to distance yourself. And it's hard to maintain a balance when you see so many poor outcomes. And you also have to separate when you go to work and you're just kind of facing humanity and life and death, and then you come home and you be a husband and a dad, and that's hard to do too. And so there has to be some insulation between, your heart and your soul and what you're doing as a job.
Thank you, Terry.
So I'm going to maybe round it off. I don't know. I'm going to say this, brace yourself, because some of you aren't going to like what you're going to hear from me. So be ready, all right? First and foremost, stop using the emergency department like a doctor's office. If you don't have a physician, get a physician. We have a million urgent cares around here. But stop using, and if you have friends that do that, tell them to stop using the emergency room like a doctor's office. So many things do not need to go to the emergency room. It is against the law for us to turn anyone away. It's called an EMTALA violation in our world, and it has huge fines. So we're never going to turn anybody away. But I will tell you, for all southeastern Michigan hospitals that are at capacity, not because of COVID, but because people are coming to us because we're trying to stay open for the cardiac issues, the pulmonary issues, the kidney issues, or infections. So stop using the emergency department like a physician office. We knew before COVID that by 2025 we were going to be 500,000 nurses short in the United States. We have no idea what COVID has now done. We have nurses leaving nursing in droves. Every day I get a resignation. Most of them are taking travel jobs because the money that is coming out of travel is huge. $30,000 sign-on bonuses, $100 an hour. So what does that mean to you as a consumer? We have hospitals that are shorter staffed. We can have our EVS, which is our environmental people. We pay about $15, $16 an hour. They can go to Speedway and get $17 an hour, free gas, free snacks, and tuition reimbursement. Do you think hospitals are going to be able to keep people who clean the hospital? No. All of us struggle getting our support staff, and we cannot do it without our respiratory therapists, our people who clean the hospital, our people who help us with dietary. Cody works with us now, and he works in our food and nutrition. We call them fans. Mm-hmm. We can't do what we do without those support work. Our patient care technicians like Chelsea Kowalowski. We cannot do our job. And so how we look at this next year, we're going to have to do a lot of healing. We are very sure we're going to see post-traumatic stress in our staff. We have already seen it. We anticipate it's going to probably get worse before it gets better. And so my other piece to you would be, please practice patience. These people do not need your wrath. They don't need your attitude or rudeness. Not that any of you would do that, but people can be really, really, really mean. So I just ask that you be with, think about that, if you can share that. And then the last thing, the vaccine was never a red or blue issue. The vaccine is science. If you choose to take it or not take it, it's up to you. But it has not ever been a political red or blue issue. Until you've had to hold the hand of a patient that regrets not getting that vaccine and watch them take their last breaths, you have no right to tell somebody whether it's good or bad.
I guess the only other thing I would say is just be conscious of, if you're in the group that believes this whole thing is a hoax, or if you're in the group that thinks that the world is ending, you need to listen to other people. You need to listen and hear what they have to say. That's been the hardest thing for me, being in the middle and watching how people treat one another, because of their opinion. I can't say more.
I think we've all said it all. Terry, do you have anything else you want to say?
At this point, or
anything?
I'll move on to the next question, which is a hard question, I know, because sometimes I wonder, how do I have the audacity to ask this question? But I think it's the most important question I'm going to ask you right now. How have you seen God at work through all of this?
So one of the things I've seen God at work is something that we've done here, and that's that we do things virtually now. That is going to be such a blessing for our shut-ins moving forward. And that's one good thing that has come out of this pandemic. It's forced churches, even churches of our size, to figure that out. Even though we didn't have all the electronics and all of that kind of stuff, but we figured it out. And that AV team back there is amazing, what they've done.
I kind of blended all of that in with all my other answers, but we saw it all the time with the community outreach, the teamwork. I mentioned a lot of the things that we, pulling together, and really just knowing, the prayers, because sometimes there's nothing else you can do, but the best thing you can do is to pray for us, to pray for your healthcare workers, regardless if they're a nurse or if they're a PCT or if they're a nursing assistant or a respiratory therapist or someone who cleans the hospital or delivers food. And support overall. I think the other piece that I would say, and how did I see God in this, is that how incredibly fragile life can be, and that you are not guaranteed tomorrow, whether it's a car accident or COVID, and that we really need to think about how we live each day and how blessed we are. There are many, many countries that have not even gotten the vaccine yet. We're looking at a booster dose, you guys. We're looking at a booster to make you safer. And we have countries who've gotten nothing. That's how blessed we are and how incredibly lucky we are to be in a country like this.
So we have our hospital chaplain, Larry, and he's a guy that I really like. He's a person who, first of all, I work nights, and I've talked to him, which is to get somebody to come in at night and talk to you and make rounds and just, like, he'll walk by and he'll just take time and talk. And we were doing our morning rounds where I was giving out all the assignments to all the nurses from step down in ICU and where they were going in the hospital. And he would come up and pray with us. And we had all these exposures with nurses and patients with COVID, and I was remarking that none of the ICU nurses or techs had gotten sick after like a month. And I mean, these are all the sickest of the sick patients, and none of us had gotten it. And I thought for sure we were going to be short-staffed because all of our nurses are going to be getting sick, and none of them had yet. And I said, the reason why none of us has gotten sick is because Larry's been coming up and praying for us. I'm finished, and I'm saying the word us. He's been praying for us, and the elevator goes ding, and Larry comes out of the elevator. And I was like, that's divine intervention right there. He's coming to pray for us. Jessica and I were on a tall ship once, two-masted ship with sails and stuff, and it was a really cool thing. And I wanted to get a cool picture of us on this sail ship, and I realized you can't get a picture of yourself on a sailboat because you're on it. And I think to say, how have you seen God at work in all this? It's hard to do when you're in the middle of it, how to take a step back and see it. But I do know, and I'm not going to share it with you in this forum, but I have seen times, I know for me, where my tank is empty, my wallet's empty, and someone says, I need you to drive 500 miles. I need to borrow $1,000. And I go, look, my pockets are empty, and all of a sudden I realize there's $1,000 in my pocket. That's not a literal story, that's an analogy, but I know that I have been empty, and I have said words that didn't come from me. They were God's words. And I knew it. I knew it didn't come from me. And I looked back a week later and I said, I told Jessica this. I said, that wasn't me. I know that wasn't me. So I've seen God at work in my own life, in my own personal life through this. Like I said, the balance is a hard thing, but I also think, and I've shared this with other employees, I graduated with my master's and I applied for jobs. And typically, I have someone to help me get a job when I go somewhere, or my qualifications are just so outstanding, everybody wants to hire me. And I applied for different jobs at NP, and I didn't get them. And it was really disappointing for me, because I think very highly of myself. and nobody hired me, and then this pandemic hit, and it was just like I had to be at the top of my game to be doing what we were doing. And I thought, that's a purpose right there. And other people that I know that I work with know how disappointed I am to have gone through school and worked so hard to graduate, and here I am having not taken that step in my career. And they say, yeah, but you're here with us and you're doing this, and that's important. And so I think I'm going to look back and I'm going to see the footprints in the stand where, there's one set of footprints and all that. And I think that's going to happen where I'm going to look back and I'm going to say, that's where I see God in this.
Thank you. I know, and you guys, if you want to add to that, I just when I said it, how do I have the audacity to ask this question? But we have to believe this, that God is at work, even if we can't see it yet. And maybe if I ask you this question 5 years from now, you can talk to me more. Thank you, because I think we need to hear this, that God is has been, is, and will be working through the mess that we're in. Do you guys have anything to add to this question?
So one of the fortunate things the three of us can say is we work in a faith-based organization. And every morning at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., at least, I don't know if they still do it at Providence, but we start the day with a prayer. And I will tell you how essential that was for us. And he talks about Larry coming to the huddles in the morning, how we had pastoral care in every unit, praying with the teams. We have huddles at 7 a.m., which is a change of shift, and 7 p.m. And we have huddle boards, and we're around the huddle boards, or we're all together. And often we started with prayers. And how incredibly, I worked in another organization, you all know it, for 27 years, that is not a faith-based organization. As a matter of fact, if you stopped to pray and you wanted to pray, you were told you can't do that. But I think that made another difference on how we survived and how we, the next day, showed up. It was because God was everywhere.
It took me 27 years to convince Yvonne that she would find a difference in a faith-based organization. No, that is very true. And I would just put a plug out for anybody that is looking for a career change or something to think about doing. Chaplains in pastoral care are invaluable in hospitals. Our previous youth minister, David Cohn, has gone through that training, and he is a chaplain at a hospital on the East Coast. I think it's on the East Coast. Birmingham, Alabama. There's somebody else I know that's on the East Coast then. And then, several friends of mine that have been ministers have gone through the training, and they now work at hospitals. And they are an amazing group of people. And we both work at Catholic organizations, and so you'd think they would all be priests, but they're not. There's a blended group of people that are there, many faiths, and they will pray with whichever kind of patient, whatever your faith background is. And you're right, they were amazing.
Amen.
We don't have a Larry, but we have another guy. So, yeah.
So, I know you guys can talk for like another couple hours.
Sure.
And I encourage people, talk with them. They're very friendly. And our other healthcare workers, talk about their experiences. And I wanted to specifically give you this stage today because I think it's important for us to hear what you've been going through. And so this last question I have for you, there's another time you can add anything else after this, but what are ways that we as a church, as a community, can support our healthcare workers during this time, today, October 31st, 2021, and then tomorrow? What can we do?
I think just know that we're tired. Terry told you that. We're tired emotionally and physically. And I think just understand that we have a unique experience with this that we're more than happy to share with you.
Yeah, I think I hit on a couple things earlier, but I do think, and I know I might not have done the greatest job of that, but this is truly the greatest job in the whole wide world. I could do a different nursing job every year of my career, which I figure I'm going to be working till I'm about 85. And you really could, but it's not how people feel right now. And so I hope to get back to that. We are losing nurses. Some of them are right in these seats right now because they just are so tired. Our physicians are tired. Our PCTs are tired. But it truly is the greatest career or greatest job choice that I could have made for myself. Although, I hope we can recover and we can get back to how it was. And I think the other piece is understanding that this isn't going to go away. And it's the challenge that we're going to face as a community, as a congregation. And that we, have to lean on each other for strength and lean on God. And it's been by the grace of God that we've made it. I don't really know. I know the longest stretched I worked was in the very beginning, 17 days straight, which I know for some people is nothing. But 17 days straight was a pretty big record for me. And I'm not talking like short 8-hour days. Like I'm talking 16-hour days. And that's just me. There's probably many more that have done more. So I'll let Terry if there's anything else.
I get two things. One, I'm just going to piggyback off that about healthcare careers being a great career. It's a biblical career. If you have ever done one of these things where we bring people up here and do the washing of the feet, and there's a service to it. I mean, it's literally the service, right? Jesus was a servant, and that was his demonstration of service, of being the prince and leader and authority and ruler, and yet serving. And there's an intimacy in having another person put their body in your hands. There's a trust. They say like lawyers is like a 0 and nurses are like 100. When you allow someone on a ventilator who is paralyzed and their life is literally in your hands by the person pushing buttons, and we're proning people and their body's completely out of their control, and it's the person that's moving their arms and moving their head and keeping them alive. And there's a trust relationship there. I was thinking about Jesus and his miracles and how many of them had to do with health. He healed a hand to demonstrate, he said, how about the time when he said, which is easier, to tell this guy that his sins are forgiven or to say, get up and walk? The person that was blind, the Syrophoenician woman begging for her daughter to be healed. Healed. The lepers. You weren't even supposed to talk to them. He went up and healed them. I mean, he had to take care of people's bodies first before he could take care of their spirit. And I think they go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. The other thing, so this question, what are the ways we can support our healthcare workers? We've gotten letters from little kids saying thank you for taking care of the community, and we've gotten pizza, donuts. People like fat nurses, I think.
Extremely healthy food.
So we've gotten cookies and all things, and it's great. And I'd like to be that rah-rah guy that gets all pumped up by seeing flowers and things. If one thing would encourage me, it would be that if people would look up the hierarchy of evidence. And let me tell you, we have an intensivist in our ICU. He's one of the smartest 3 humans I know. This guy, if you take what Gordon was to engineering, this guy is that towards critical care medicine. He's super smart. If he wrote a book on his experience with ICU patients with COVID, this would be the lowest level of evidence considered in medicine. He is an expert. He is a top expert. And if he wrote his experiences, that's the lowest level of medical evidence. Think about that. So when a guy gets on a podcast and says, I took horse paste that treats worms and dandruff or whatever, and he has 20 million people listening to him, we had a guy come in to work to our ICU that ate this horse paste, and he died a week later. Because people would rather listen to a person on a podcast than a physician. Up on the scale of level of evidence, you have randomized control trials and things like that, and you're still not even in the top tier of evidence. I've been doing this ICU thing for years and years. I treated H1N1s, I've had people on ECMO, I've had transplants, I've done all these things, and I'm not even on the list. So we're getting to randomized control trials like they do with vaccines and stuff, and you're still not even at the top. You have to get people who are taking all of these random control tests and then making guidelines and things. So guidelines are like in the top tier. You have people that are writing Facebook posts saying, hey, I took this chili powder and it worked for me and I got better. And so I just want you to take a look at the hierarchy of evidence, and then when people tell you that this works or this doesn't work or you should get this or you shouldn't get that, just look on that level of evidence and where that is on the pyramid and say, how does this fit in? And that's how you can help healthcare workers, because when people come in and they say, oh, you have the treatment that's been proven on 5 continents that they're using with doctors from all around the world independently have it approved, and you have it in your right hand, I don't want that. I'd rather take this stuff, because a guy in a podcast, I've had several people die because they said they heard on a podcast or on an article or something And it's just frustrating because we're just coming to work trying to help people, and they're refusing help because they don't understand evidence. And I would just love for people to understand that. If I could say help healthcare workers somehow, it'd be understand where your information's coming from.
And understand what Terry's saying, that science takes time. You can't have a double-blind randomized study when you're in the midst of a novel virus. You can't do that in 2 weeks. It takes time to do that, which is why our knowledge base has changed over the last 18 months. It's not because people were lying to you 18 months ago and now they're telling you the truth. That's not it at all. It's because we've learned.
Last question, and I'm going to give you like 30 seconds. So
I got nothing.
this is not your opportunity to go another hour. Anything else you want to add? All right. I want to say it again. Thank you. Thank you. I want to say it one more time. Thank you. We're going to thank you. And last thing, I'm going to pray for you. And pray for all of our healthcare workers and your patients. Prayer has gotten us through this. Prayer will. Our Father in heaven, praise be your name. You are our rock. You are our refuge. And you have been yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We give thanks to you for those who care for the sick and for the injured, which, as we read earlier, when we ask, where have you seen you, O Lord? When did we see you sick? You were there in the least of these. And I'm thankful for those who have been caring for the least of these, who have been caring for you. Because, Lord, you know what it's like to care for those in need of compassion and mercy. You have been and are the great physician. Bless all of our healthcare workers, from the doctors and nurses to the support staff and technicians, the administrators, to the researchers and scientists and pharmacists. Give them strength when they are weary and rest whenever they can. Grant them peace in the midst of stress and chaos. Care for them as they care for others. Keep them healthy. Keep them safe. And be with their families, their spouses, their children as they support them at home. And help us as a church and as a community to do what we can to help them, to show them love and encouragement and support, reminding them that they are not alone, and to do so not just with our words, but with our deeds. Help us to be a light in this community, reflecting the light that you have given us with your love, and which shines even in the darkest of times. And through it all, may we continue to support each other in love. May your Holy Spirit be upon us, continuing the ministry of Jesus through us. Give us the imaginations and creativity to come up with the ways to encourage and love one another like we have never done so before. And in all things, O Lord, may you receive all glory and honor and praise. In the name of our Savior Jesus, we pray these things. Amen.